This video is called Pokemon Generation 2 Hates Itself and Why You Should Love It by Professor Bopper. Make sure you go subscribe and check out this person's other videos as well.
From the dawn of time, which we can retroactively date to November 21st, 1999, humanity has scribbled cave walls, tablets, and gigabytes full of discourse lamenting the second generation of Pokemon. Videos and walls of text and streamer rage have had these Game Boy Color games circling the drain for a quarter century. In this span of time that matches the time between the peaks of World Wars I and II, a list of complaints against Gold and Silver have been codified. The level curve, the truncated Kanto, the lack of early access to many Generation 2 Pokemon, and many of the easier-to-find Generation 2 Pokemon being bad have become axioms trapped in the muck. The impression, seemingly, that Pokemon 2nd Generation hates itself and is ashamed of its Pokemon and of its relationship to Generation 1. Is all this true?
Yes.
Let's find out.
I personally don't think Gen 2 is very fun and or interesting enough to not just play Soul Silver at this point, which didn't fix a whole lot, but at least it looks better. This is very well edited though, by the way. This looks great. So edited by
For years,
Easy
the
Min.
most common complaint that I've personally heard about Gold and Silver is the lack of Generation 2 Pokemon available in the main game.
That is a big
These are games that,
thing.
so the legends say, feature mostly retread Pokemon from Generation 1. These 1999 sequels to the highest-selling Pokemon game of all time expanded the iconic roster of 151 to the less iconic 251 roster. These 100 newly added Pokemon have a truant reputation. Many were scrapped from Pokemon Gen 1, supposedly. Many are absent from the main game of Gen 2, purportedly. And many would need to appear in the spin-off title Pokemon Coliseum to be catchable in Gen 3. Definitely.
Oh, wow.
From one perspective,
I didn't know
without
that. That's a little dumb.
even looking at the data, it's not true. It's actually quite the opposite.
Wait,
There
really?
are no Generation 1 Pokemon in Generation 2. One of the major changes that happened between Generations 1 and 2 is that the special stat has been unrolled into distinct offensive and defensive stats and then rebalanced. This makes every single Pokemon that shares a name and likeness with a Generation 1 Pokemon fundamentally different from its namesake. This is where we separate the thinkers from the feelers.
No! I understand what he's saying. I want things that look different. I don't give a shit about... This isn't even like the official physical special split. This is like the baby physical special split. I want my things to look different.
Pokemon were stripped of all of its visual, linguistic, and
pause every
auditory
2 minutes.
signifiers, reduced to screens of code, no different from ancient text-based adventure games like Zork or, I don't know, The Count, where we play with equations instead of sprites. Then we are in a world of radical, minute difference. But those differences don't matter. Pokemon has these signifiers of sprites and names and the super effective explosion sound. You could give Faulkner's Pidgeotto 400 speed and 5 attack. Give it negative 50 attack. What matters is that we see it. We see Pidgeotto.
Yeah.
We see its name in Pokemon GB font, and we know we've been here before.
Okay,
The numbers
true.
running the Pokemon machine
True.
and spitting out damage calculations may be different, but
I should have
we
let him
can't see
finish.
it.
Yeah.
It's not real. Let's see what Plato had to say about this.
Okay.
In Book 7 of the Republic, Plato outlines the allegory of the cave. Prisoners are chained in a cave, facing a wall, and can only see the shadows of the outside world.
Okay.
To them, Plato says, the truth would be literally nothing but the shadows of the images. So then, let's kill the lights. There is no difference between these Pidgeottos to our light-starved eyes. This is, of course, not reality. Plato tells us that when a prisoner of the cave is liberated and compelled suddenly to stand up and turn his neck round and walk and look toward the light, he will suffer sharp pains. The glare will distress him, and he will be unable to see the realities of which, in his former state, he had seen the shadows. For us Pokemon fans, that reality that casts the shadows are these numbers, the base stats.
I did not think this video was going to talk about Play-Doh.
Clearly differentiate between Generation 1 and 2 Pidgeotto.
Yes, clearly.
For a young Pokemon fan first discovering the color-coded numbers that girdle each of their favorite pocket monsters, it's incomprehensible. What does this truth mean? There are further subatomic levels we can dive into. We can go into EVs, IVs.
Sure.
We can go into the code itself.
Right.
We can discover the very writing that makes a Pidgeotto in red and blue, and what makes a Pidgeotto in gold and silver.
Okay.
Are these the same Pokemon?
Yes.
Aristotle fanboys will say no. Empirically, these two Pidgeottos are distinct species. For the lovers of platonic forms, these are the same. The variations in their engines do not take away the fundamental essence of a Pidgeotto. Blue's Pidgeotto and Faulkner's Pidgeotto cast the same shadow because that is their form. To suggest otherwise, to say that there are no Generation 1 Pokemon in Gold and Silver, would be an act of pedantry so big-brained and unappealing as to be worthless for anything other than philosophy fueling the hot take culture of YouTube. It would, however, be within the bounds of polite reason to say that no Generation 1 Pokemon that have immigrated to Generation 2 are exactly as they were.
Sure.
They've all matured into more nuanced base stats and movesets.
That makes
They're
more
all
sense to say.
experientially different. Using an Onix in one game is different from using an Onix in the other, and that's before the other details that separate Kanto and Johto from one another are understood. So then, if these experiences are different, why do people criticize Gold and Silver for having too many Generation 1 Pokemon and not enough Generation 2 Pokemon? All Pokemon, and perhaps all video games, and perhaps all experiences converge on novelty. When I played with my dinosaur toys as a small ignorant child, I didn't have a set of 20 T-Rexes. You have a T-Rex, a Velociraptor, an Apatosaurus, and a Triceratops, a Spinosaurus if you grew up after Jurassic Park 3, because even if Dilophosaurus is your favorite dinosaur, to play with 20 Dilophosauruses is no fun at all. Blue is my favorite color because of all the other colors. I would never think of running a Gold and Silver team of 6 Shuckles. Using one of them is hard enough. I do it for
That's
love,
fair.
but forget 6, and so much of it is the same with the wider roster. Novelty isn't by itself all that matters, and certainly the value of novelty will vary from person to person, but for a game series targeted at 8-year-olds about collecting your favorite creatures and making it work from there, novelty matters. Let's check the novelty of Gold and Silver.
I'm lost. If you're lost, it's pretty much just saying that Pidgeotto and Pidgeotto are the same Pokemon. But Pidgeotto and Pidgeotto Gold and Silver is different than Pidgeotto Red and Blue, because Pidgeotto Gold and Silver acts, works, and behaves completely different than Pidgeotto Red and Blue because of the code that Pidgeotto Gold and Silver was written with. But that's a head take, because people look at Pidgeotto, they see Pidgeotto, and they read Pidgeotto, so it's a Pidgeotto. And not many of us losers care about base stats and AI mechanics and physical special stats when we're trying to gauge how good and how viable a Pokemon is for a Nuzlocke. People just want to use something that's not Pidgeotto, because if they want to use Pidgeotto, they'll just go use Pidgeotto from Red and Blue. They want to use Hoot Hoot or Knockdown because it's nuanced, or because it's novel and different, which is what he's explaining now. So technically, there's no such thing as a Gen 1 Pokemon and a Gen 2 game, because Gen 2 functions so differently than Gen 1 that the two Pidgeottos are different. But people don't give a shit. People just want to not look at Pidgeotto for a second game.
Check the novelty of Gold and Silver.
Yeah, let's check the novelty.
Do these games massively favor Generation 1
I'm gonna hear him
Pokemon
out for
and
now,
lock
yeah.
the new Pokemon to the post-game?
Okay.
Let's take a look. This graph looks specifically at Pokemon Silver. Along the x-axis is every evolution line in the game, sorted by when they first appear as a catchable wild Pokemon, gift Pokemon, or trade Pokemon.
Okay.
There is some discretion as to the order because Gen 2 does feature some branching paths.
Yeah,
In the case
that's my biggest problem with Gen 2, is the branching paths situation.
of routes like, say, 38 and 42, which become available at the same time, I defaulted to the game's intended gym order, so the left branch out of Ecruteak City is listed before the right branch out of Ecruteak City. As well, evolutionary lines are only listed once. So, for example, once a level 10 Krabby becomes available, that counts as both Krabby and Kingler.
Sure.
Along the same lines, only one starter is considered since they're mutually exclusive without trading or hacking, you filthy cheaters. I put Cyndaquil here, even though I picked Chikorita in my run, because I'm a hater who doesn't acknowledge Totodile. Let's parse this mess of numbers.
What's wrong with Totodile?
There are a lot. In addition to all the Pokemon, the y-axis indicates the highest level each Pokemon is catchable at when they first appear. For example, Aipom is the 33rd Pokemon to become catchable and can be caught at level 10. This graph covers the whole game, including the post-game where the player leaves their homeland of Johto for the mysterious lands of urban-developed Kanto. For now, let's zoom in on the base game, from the moment the player gets their starter Pokemon to the moment they enter the Elite Four. Our question is simple. How much of this new Gen 2 Pokedex is available during the main game? Pokemon Gold and Silver introduced 100 new Pokemon, with a total of 52 new evolutionary lines. These 52 evolutionary lines represent 83 of the 100 new Pokemon.
Yeah.
The other 17 new Pokemon are evolutions added to lines that originated in Red and Blue.
Sure, Crobat.
This makes classifications of Gen 2 Pokemon a little annoying, because some of the new Pokemon are babies like Pichu, Smoochum, and Igglybuff that act as a new Stage 1 evolution for Gen 1 Pokemon. Others are new end-stage evolutions, such as Scizor, Blissey, and Politoed. The way I decided to break this down is simple. New end-stage evolutions like Espeon, Kingdra, and Porygon 2 count for Gen 2, while the new babies do not. With nearly 1 out of every 5 Pokemon
because you're not using the babies, you're eventually going to use the evolved stages of the Gen 1 Pokemon. So that makes sense to not count the babies.
To Gen 1 lines, I think it's only fair to give Gen 2 some of these. In addition to the 52 original evolutionary lines, Gold and Silver adds new end-stage evolutions to Zubat, Eevee, Slowbro, Onix, Oddish, Poliwag, Scyther, Horsey, Porygon, and Chansey.
I did not know there was that many new evolutions in Gen 2. I also didn't know Steelix was Gen 2.
Bringing our number up to 62 Gen 2 evolution lines. Because these starters are all mutually exclusive, we'll drop the number of evolutionary lines from 62 to 60. And because Celebi is an event-exclusive Pokemon, we'll drop it again to 59. So, how many of those 59 evolutionary lines are available in the main game? In the main game, there are a total of 89 evolutionary lines available before the Elite Four. Of those, 46 are either Gen 2 exclusive or have Gen 2 final stage evolutions. In total, 78% of Gen 2's original or modified evolutionary lines are obtainable in the main game of Silver. 8% of Gen 2's original or have Gen 2 final stage evolutions. In total, 78% of Gen 2's original or modified evolutionary lines are obtainable in the main game of Silver. Of the remaining 13, 4...
So you can get 78% of the Gen 2 Pokedex before E4.
4 are version exclusives to Gold, and 9 are locked to the post-game. It also means that 52% of the available Pokemon in the Pokemon Silver main game are Gen 2 Pokemon. So
literally just more than half of the entire main game is Gen 2.
Gen 2 has a reputation of underrepresenting its roster, but on its surface, it appears to bias its own original Pokemon. While 52% doesn't seem overwhelming, and it's not, it's worth considering just how small Gen 2's Pokedex is. At 100 new Pokemon, the Johto Dex is almost exactly 2/3 the size of the Kanto Dex. If we throw out the Kanto Pokemon that aren't available in any form whatsoever in Gen 2 without trading, the Kanto starters, Omanite, Kabuto, the legendary birds, Mew and Mewtwo, and Celebi, the 99 non-mythical Johto Pokemon represent 43% of the Pokemon available across Gold and Silver. In this way, Johto Pokemon are actually overrepresented compared to the proportion of the roster they occupy. This feels wrong, though. The numbers are here, I've seen them, I'm looking at them. Yet they're wrong.
Because the Pokemon that are actually used by enemy trainers skews towards Gen 1, right?
I sit here, I type, I write out a dry report of a graph with numbers. I'm not a statistician. I'm easily impressed by the graph feature on Google Sheets. I do not know math. I understand very little about Pokemon. So, like all unintelligent Neanderthals that have wandered onto this free use platform, let's cook up this data. I don't have an agenda, except that I don't agree with the numbers I found.
Yeah.
So, let's change them. It's disquieting to consider a new evolution like Crobat the same as a wholly original Pokemon like Mareep. Crobat is just a Zubat, but with, like, more of it.
That's rude. Crobat's amazing and adorable.
Despite growing 148.8 pounds, eyes, and 2 more wings, Crobat is Zubat and Zubat is Kanto. It's hard for
Crobat
to feel original to Johto when you have to grind it through Zubat and Golbat. I'm not suggesting that we have an effective Pokedex percentage a la effective field goal percentage from Pro Basketball Reference. But what I am saying is that if we isolate just the 52 wholly original Gen 2 evolutionary lines, removing 2 starters and Celebi, there are only 36 Gen 2 lines available out of the 86 lines in the main game.
He's saying numbers really fast. Hold on.
2 evolutionary lines, removing 2 starters and Celebi.
Sure.
There are only 36 Gen 2 lines available out of the 86 lines in the main game.
Yeah, that's
from
way
52%
little.
Down to 42%. Is this fair? Probably not. The decision to remove those new final evolutions is based entirely on my feelings, but the removal of some of them isn't that crazy. Let's zoom in on one of them in particular.
Onyx.
Hey, Onyx. You good? Nah. Well, we got a fix for that. Steelix is a new, improved industrial Onyx. The old minerals that constructed our igneous friend have been filed, sanded, and washed away and alloyed with carbon and iron. It is, therefore, fitting that to bring Onyx into the future, we must fuse it with technology.
Nice.
Giving our old friend a metal coat and squeezing them through a link cable transforms them into Steelix, bringing Onyx from antiquity into modernity, from Kanto into Johto, and into the 52%. The problem is getting the metal coat.
Okay, yeah.
One is available in the SS Aqua, a location unavailable to the player until the postgame.
Okay, that's annoying.
Technically, this means Steelix, despite being a Johto original Pokemon that evolves from a Pokemon that can be caught before the first gym, is locked to the post-game.
Yeah.
Technically, this isn't true either, because the player can steal metal coats using the move Thief on wild Magnemites.
Who's doing that? Who's doing that, though?
There is a 2% chance of getting a metal coat this way, which is good news because it's twice the odds of finding a wild Dunsparce in Dark Cave, or a wild Snubbull on Route 38, or a wild Marill in Mount Mortar, or a wild Yanma on Route 35, but I think I'm getting ahead of myself. With that 2% chance of thievery, which is actually a 1.992% chance since Thief only successfully steals a held item 99.6% of the time, which is good news because it's 99.2% higher odds than finding a wild Dunsparce in Dark Cave, or a wild Snubbull on Route 38, or a wild Marill in Mount Mortar, or a wild Yanma on Route 35. You can evolve both Onyx and Scyther this way into 2 very rare Johto Pokemon, and this is a trend for the new evolutions. All of the new evolutions in Gen 2 are either trade evolutions or take advantage of new mechanics introduced in Gold and Silver. In addition to Onyx and Scyther, Slowbro evolves into Slowking if traded with the King's Rock. Same for Poliwhirl into Politoed. Seadra evolves into Kingdra if traded with the Dragon Scale. Porygon evolves into Porygon 2 when traded with the Upgrade Disc. Golbat and Chansey evolve into Crobat and Blissey based on happiness, while Eevee evolves into Umbreon or Espeon based on both happiness and time of day. This little trend of weird evolutions made me curious. That's 10 Johto Pokemon that require mechanics new to Gold and Silver, held items, and happiness to evolve.
Yeah, and they're difficult to do.
What about the other 90? Well, there's Togepi, Igglybuff, Cleffa, Pichu, Smoochum, Elekid, and Magby, which have to be hatched from eggs, with the latter 6 needing to be bred using the new breeding system. The legendary dogs, Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, roam the overworld and have to be tracked down. Now we're up to 20. Pokemon Gold and Silver also introduced a new time mechanic.
Yeah.
The game tracks the time of day. This is a suicidal feature that has killed every copy of Gen 2 Pokemon, and also lets the game have Pokemon that only appear during certain times of the day. The Pokemon that are locked behind the clock are Lediba, Ledian,
killed
Hoppip,
itself.
Skiploom, Corsola, Sunkern, Hoot Hoot, Noctowl,
That little bastard is a time of day. I thought it was a hatchable baby.
Hoot Hoot, Noctowl, Spinarak, Ariados, Mischievous, Murkrow, Sneasel, and Houndour. By extension, the evolution
Would you cut on one more time?
Mischievous, Murkrow, Sneasel, and Houndour.
Is that how you pronounce that?
By extension, the evolution-locked
Houndour?
Pokemon from these lines, Sunflora and Houndoom, are locked behind time of day. Apom, Pineco, Fortress by extension, and Heracross can only be caught by
Literally
headbutting
never
specific
knew that was how you pronounce that Pokemon.
randomized trees, while Hitmontop has to be evolved under stat-specific conditions. In total, 41% of the Johto Pokemon can only be captured if the player engages in some way with the new Generation 2 mechanics.
41%.
That's a hefty pool
That's a
of
lot.
Pokemon, and I'm a huge fan of this. Love
You're
it.
a huge fan
And I love
of
it because headbutting
How do I pronounce it? Houndour.
trees makes me feel like the crocodile hunter. I love the crocodile hunter. I also love Heracross. The appearance rate of Heracross is 30%, but that doesn't quite capture the depths of hunting that we're dealing with. Heracross has a 30% encounter rate on some trees, because Heracross's location is based on the trainer ID. It's not
Wait,
that big a
really?
deal, just
Why?
look it up on 37.97.147.73/headbutt%20grid.htm and
What? Yeah, this is simple.
punch in your
This
trainer
is
ID
super
if
easy.
you're a filthy cheater.
Uh-huh.
Otherwise, the likelihood of finding a Heracross or a Pineco is unlikely, but not astronomically unlikely, not unhinged and cursed, not Feebas or Munchlax. One of the great appeals of
Feebas is
Pokemon is that
obnoxious.
collecting and acquiring and building a team involves the hunt. When you embark on your journey to become the Pokemon Master as a kid, you don't know exactly what your party will be, or what Pokemon you find, or where you will find them. As a cynical adult with instant Bulbapedia access at all times, the thrill of finding rare
Yeah.
and esoteric Pokemon is replaced by the annoyance of looking for them. The lack of foreknowledge in what
I
you'll find
guess,
is one of the great
sure.
strengths of Nuzlocke, which is perhaps why there's such an appeal to that challenge run for players who otherwise know so much about these games. But that's a topic for another day. As a small
It's
child
me.
who
Nuzlocke mentioned. Nuzlocke's mentioned. Oh my god.
watched Pokemon on TV and had some cards and played Fire Red, a game that, like Pokemon Coliseum, was purchased from my favorite video game store, Meyer, on my purple Game
Wait, Meyer. That's not. Meyer's a video game store now?
Boy Advance on the bus
Who'd have
in
thought?
second grade. I knew what the Pokemon were. I had seen them all, and wanting to catch them all, from the satanic to the gamer to the clandestine, was the appeal. This appeal would reverberate from the release of Red and Blue all the way to playing Pokemon Go every day, and I love Gold and Silver for emphasizing the hunt beyond RNG. Gold and Silver, with their time restrictions on Pokemon and roaming legendaries and lore Pokemon and gimmick Pokemon and baby Pokemon, creates a more interesting Pokedex to fill out. Catching them all in Red and Blue was not exactly difficult. There were difficult Pokemon for sure, but the ecosystem itself was limited. Sure, the Gen 2 Pokemon suck sometimes or are unusable, but who cares? Sometimes you need to scrounge around caves to find an elusive Dunsparce. That 1% mongrel has a BST of 415. That's decent firepower, but it's a Pokemon who primarily matters for how tedious it is to catch. Same for the babies who have to be bred and the legendaries that have to be tracked. Some of the most hated Pokemon in the series to catch include the trait evolutions and roaming legendaries and certain monstrosities later in the series like the aforementioned Gen 4 Munchlax or Spiritomb. I understand why it sucks, and it is a pain in the ass to catch Entei and Raikou. I will fully admit that praising the tediousness in catching some Pokemon is wistful. In the moment, it's actively distasteful to glide between a town and two routes with super repels and a level 39 Pokemon to catch Entei and Raikou, but also the Pokemon tagline is, gotta catch 'em all. If everything were free and also the same, why would you want to catch 'em all? A common refrain is that it just plain sucks to be unable to catch all Pokemon in a single save file or single run or with convenience. Me personally, I don't care. The social experience of Pokemon is too important to my love of the series to be sacrificed at the altar of convenience, an altar that's kinda silly for games that are, for the most part, very easy. Raikou being hard to get, especially for a kid, made it much cooler, and sometimes it isn't enough to have a Pokemon. Sometimes it's much better to want to have a Pokemon. But we're kind of losing the plot right now.
Yeah, a little
No matter
bit.
how much I like the new ways to catch Pokemon, no matter how much Gen 2 minorly favors its original roster, there's an overwhelming sense of melancholy around the Gen 2 roster, so let's try something else. Let's sort these Pokemon another way.
We're still talking about the roster? Oh my god. Okay, I think that having all of the different ways to catch something that is new and interesting and weird, I don't think it's a bad thing, and I kind of like it about Gen 2. I think the day-night cycle is interesting. And like you can only catch Hoot at night. That's kind of cute. You can only catch some of the bug types during like the bug catching contest, and like I don't really have a problem with all of the different new interesting ways to catch Pokemon. That I've like never filled out a Pokedex. That is not why I played or play Pokemon games. But if the people who like to fill out the Pokedex, if that gives them a little bit of a hunt, if that gives them a little bit of a rush, then cool. And I think Gen 2 gave people who wanted to hunt for all of the Pokemon new ways to do it by doing time-based things or chasing the legendaries down or the 1% Dunsparce type deal. I have no problem with that whole section. My only problem with Gen 2 is how weak some of the mons are. I think he'll get to that.
On this graph, we have every single catchable wild Pokemon in the game, excluding fixed encounters and the roaming legendaries.
Sure.
Along this x-axis is a Pokemon's highest appearance rate. Along the y-axis is a Pokemon's base stat total.
Okay.
What I expected is that the rarer the Pokemon, the stronger it would be. This is generally true. This trend line, which I assume works, shows that as Pokemon become more common, they become weaker.
Sure.
There are exceptions to this, and there are some Pokemon like Dunsparce that are more about the joy of the hunt than battle proficiency.
Sure.
However, fans of being disappointed by Gen 2 Pokemon may notice something. On this graph, Generation 1 Pokemon are in red, while Generation 2 Pokemon are in yellow. In general, Generation 2 Pokemon are both rarer and weaker than Generation 1 Pokemon. For the 1% crew, Generation 2 has Meryl, Yanma, Dunsparce, and Snubbull, while Generation 1 gets Chansey. But, you know, Chansey now evolves into the Generation 2 original Blissey, so let's cut Gen 2 some slack here. I wonder what Yanma evolves into.
Yeah, what is Yanma evolve
If we go
into?
all the way to the other extreme, Pokemon with a 100% encounter rate, we see a Generation 2 Pokemon on top. 3 Gen 1 Pokemon here are Magikarp, Rattata, and Slowpoke. These are pretty good Pokemon that have strong evolutions.
Okay.
For Gen 2's 100% Pokemon, I've invited the excellent competitive player Zero Kim Chess on to discuss. So, I've brought on the pro-amateur competitive player Zero Kim Chess. What's the highest you ever ranked?
Top 50 Gen 9 OU and top 50 Gen 9 Nat Dex before.
I just need to know for legitimacy's sake. Alright, what we're going to be doing here is I'm just going to show you a Pokemon. And you're going to tell me all about, their competitive movesets and viability and how good they are. And don't think too hard about it. Just go with your gut reaction. So, first up.
Well, I mean, there's 26, or I guess 28 of them, right? So,
what is the
if
point
you
of
get to
this?
bring 28 to a battle, it's crazy. It's really bad.
Like how bad? What can it do? Like, what would I do to make it good?
Click Ancient Power and hope for Omni Boosts.
Jesus. Okay, so Gen 2 Pokemon are rare and weak.
Oh, unknown is the 100%. I see.
And suck, and it can't be that bad for everybody. Let's draw someone random out of a hat. Sunkern.
Don't even get
Clean 180 BST and a 30% spawn rate, Sunkern is the prototypical growth Pokemon. 180 is the lowest BST in the game.
Yes.
Magikarp,
Sunkern is the lowest BST in the entire game all the way up until Gen 8.
only slightly higher at 200, evolves into Gyarados, one of the strongest Pokemon in the game.
Yeah.
All Magikarp has to do to gain that extra 340 BST
get
is hit level 20.
Yeah, it's crazy.
For Sunkern,
It's
Ascension
so
to Godhood
easy.
requires finding a Golden Fleece, the elusive Sunstone. In Gen 1, Evolution Stones only
And let's go ahead. Let's take a
Fleece.
minute.
The
Let's take a minute to look at those stats. The elusive Sunstone and this dog seed pod. Oh, look, we get 105. We get 105 special attack. Oh, that's it. Look at the colors. Yellow, yellow, orange, green, yellow, orange, green. Fucking amazing green. Yellow, yellow, green, yellow. God.
Sunstone. In
I
Gen
hate
1,
Sunkern
Evolution
so
Stones
much.
only needed to be bought, and some, such as the Moonstone, could be found only after one badge.
Yeah.
To get our hands on that Sunstone, we need to come in first place in the bug catching contest.
Oh, that's easy.
An in-game event system with an unexplained, unintuitive scoring system that can only be done a single time on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday.
Yeah,
Look,
obviously.
here I am doing the bug catching contest and placing third with the pincer mouthfeel. I'm not saying it's rigged. I'm saying Angel Hernandez is calling balls and strikes. But if we
Oh, that's a good baseball reference. I didn't think we were going to get an MLB reference in here.
were to win
Oh, yeah.
that shiny new Sunstone
Yeah.
will turn Sunkern,
Yeah.
a member of the defensively brilliant, offensively in-demand grass type,
Oh,
into
yeah.
Sunflora, a
Beautiful.
425 base stat total behemoth. If Sunflora were catchable in the wild, it would rank as the 49th strongest catchable wild Pokemon.
There's no shot.
Giving it a
That is the 49th strongest Pokemon you can catch.
rarity score of not f***ing worth it. This sort
Yeah.
of thing is all over Gold and Silver.
Not f***ing worth
Many
it.
of the Gen 2 Pokemon are perfectly workable. Many are outright good. Many aren't worth the trouble. What makes many Pokemon worth the trouble is the cool factor. As we saw in the Onyx video, a Pokemon being perceived as cool, often by being the ace Pokemon of a major boss,
Yeah.
makes up for basically any and all shortcomings. This reveals one of the other foundational issues many people have with these games. A common complaint about Pokemon Gold and Silver that I did not mention earlier is that the gym leaders don't use Generation 2 Pokemon.
Yes, this is the big, in my opinion, this is the biggest offense that Gen 2 does. The biggest offense that Gen 2 does is that none of its gym leaders use anything from Gen 2. Show off the cool new Pokemon by having your gym leaders and your rival and your E4 use it.
Since very few Generation 2 Pokemon are locked to the post-game, I just had to check the numbers on the Johto gym leaders.
Yeah.
After all, the most notorious gym Pokemon in Gold and Silver is Miltank.
That's true.
And wouldn't you know it, Whitney's Miltank is the very first Gen 2 Pokemon that a gym leader uses.
And that's like Gym 4, isn't it?
Here are all 8 Johto gym leaders and their Pokemon.
Gen 1, Gen 1, Gen 1, Gen 1, Gen 1, Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 1, I think Gen 1, maybe Gen 2, Gen 1, Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 2, Gen 1, Gen 1, Gen 1, Gen 1, Gen 1, Gen 2. What is this? This is dog.
In total, that's 23 Pokemon, and 3 of them are Gen 2 originals.
4. Yeah, okay.
Whitney's Miltank, Jasmine's Steelix,
Uh-huh.
Price's Piloswine,
Uh-huh.
and Claire's Kingdra.
Uh-huh.
17% of all Johto gym leader Pokemon are Gen 2 Pokemon.
Yeah, that's bad. I think this screen cap right here is the worst offense that Gen 2 makes.
To put that into perspective, 13% of all Johto gym leader Pokemon are Dragonair. 17% of all Johto gym leader Pokemon are in the Gengar line.
Uh-huh.
You are about as likely to encounter a Gen 2 Pokemon during the Super Boss fight against Red, a fight that's fan service to Gen 1 and to the Pokemon anime, as you are against the Johto gym leaders.
Woof.
The numbers for our little terrible dog Gen 2 Pokemon get better the wider we spread our net. If we include all bosses, which I decided was all the gym leaders in Johto and Kanto, the Elite Four and Champion, the rival fights,
Uh-huh.
Rocket Executive fights, and
Sure.
the Red fight, we
Sure.
have 141 boss Pokemon. 36 total, or 26% of those, are Gen 2 Pokemon.
Whoa.
That, numerically, makes sense. The Johto Dex is only about 40% of the overall total Pokedex, with a solid portion of that being the new baby Pokemon that aren't going to appear in boss fights. But what we have to keep in mind is that 11 of those 36 Gen 2 Pokemon are Silver, Starter, and Sneasel. In total, of the 100 Gen 2 Pokemon, only 22 appear as boss Pokemon. I don't necessarily find this shocking. Some Pokemon like Sunkern and Hoppip wouldn't fit as boss Pokemon for the same reason you wouldn't use Pidgey or Metapod or Kakuna as boss Pokemon. The reception of Pokemon Gold and Silver holds that this sucks.
It does
That it's
suck.
a major problem to represent Gen 2 so poorly in its boss rosters.
I agree.
Why? Why is this a problem?
Because you want to see the cool thing. I bought a brand new game for $60 whole, and I want to see all the cool Pokemon that are new to the $60 game I just had my mom buy. But instead, I go up to the cool gym fight, and then I fight a Pidgey and a Pidgeotto. And then I go around and I try to catch new Pokemon, and I catch a Rattata, and then I catch Pidgey, and then, ooh, I get a knockdown. And that's cool. And then I play through, and I'm like, oh, well, this is just a warm-up. I bet you the next thing is really good and really cool and really fun. No, it's 3 Gen 1 Pokemon again. And you're like, wow. Okay, well, there's a bunch more. And then finally, Whitney, you get a Miltank, and you're like, oh, that's cool, that's new. But, like, you haven't been able to catch that many yet. That's why it's a problem.
Why?
Why is this a problem?
Why is this a problem?
Because
Pokemon
it's
is a
not as
simple
cool.
game. Single-player Pokemon often boils down to selecting your strongest attacking move, sometimes your type advantage move, to kill the enemy before they kill you. While that's reductive and could describe most violent video games, Pokemon is generally that simple, with most other move options like stat changing and status effects taking on more niche roles in single-player Pokemon. It is.
I don't think so. So you're telling me that you don't want to use toxic stall strats with stuff like Wish and Slack Off with Toxic or like Sludge Bomb? You don't try to get paralysis on like Static on Mareep is busted, and paralysis with the speed drop is great, is like irrelevant.
After all, an RPG for children.
Yeah.
Fun for the whole family. Swapping out Faulkner's Pidgeotto for a Noctowl or one of Morty's Haunters for Mischievous changes what? It changes a coat of paint.
Yeah. What are you talking about? That's the whole point of the video game. That's the whole point of the visual media. It changes the coat of paint to the new color I like. I want to see the new coat of paint. I bought the new car with the new coat of paint. I don't want to buy the new car with rust on it. I want to buy the new coat of paint. What do you mean?
Haunters for Mischievous changes what? It changes a coat of paint.
Yeah.
The way you play against a Mischievous and Noctowl in Gen 2 casual single player is the same as a Pidgeotto and Haunter.
Who cares?
You select the attack move and you kill them, likely the same move from the same Pokemon.
Yeah.
An Aristotelian approach to Pokemon would say it doesn't matter, that neither the Pidgeotto nor the Noctowl have any effect on the game. But Pokemon isn't an empirical system analyzed for all its numbers under the hood. Pokemon is, regretfully, art, so the PNGs that we blast
What do you mean, regretfully?
with Meganium Razor Leaves and Quagsirian Digs matter. Gym leaders are arbitrary, foolishly themed by type. On one hand, this makes them incredibly easy. Watch as my Golbat, Victor, kills Chuck with 3 wing attacks and no resistance. On the other hand, theming provides an opportunity to showcase new Pokemon, to infect the player's brain with the new creatures that roam the new lands of a new game. With the numbers under the hood being negligibly different and the gameplay approach being the same, the novelty of seeing Noctowl is worth more than a Pidgeotto.
Yes.
The major side quest across all mainline Pokemon games is completing the Pokedex. The Pokedex subdivides itself across Pokemon Caught and Pokemon Seen. Completing the Pokedex and experiencing the unknown wilds of Pokemon is as important as defeating gym leaders to the aesthetic drive of Pokemon. Seeing new and unknown Pokemon and boss teams fills out the Pokedex and tickles the imagination and makes the new Pokemon seem not only exotic, but powerful. In the mind of my child self in 2004, a Pokemon being on a gym leader's team mythologized it. There was something awe-inspiring about Raichu and Onix and Alakazam and Vileplume. These were Pokemon strong enough to test me, strong enough to be the goalposts to Pokemon mastery. In this sense, Pokemon Gold and Silver actually fare better than you would expect. In practice, the boss Pokemon that matters the most is the boss's ace.
I would agree.
Lieutenant Surge's Raichu goes hard because it's the true challenge you have to overcome. His Voltorb and Pikachu are merely prerequisites.
Sure.
Of the 8 Johto gym leaders and the Elite Four and Champion, 7 of the 13 use Gen 2 Pokemon as their aces.
7 out of the 13. Okay.
The aforementioned 4 Gen 2 gym Pokemon, Miltank, Steelix, Piloswine, and Kingdra, are all the aces of their gyms.
Sure.
In addition to them,
Sure, this is like later in the game. I guess, besides Whitney, like, do you not want to start off strong? Do you not want to show your player the new cool thing right away? What is the point of hiding all of the new cool stuff to the last 3 gyms besides Whitney? Like, why can't this be a Noctowl? Why can't this be a Heracross? Why can't this Ghastly be a Mischievous? Why can't Chuck have Hitmontop and Hitmonlee? Or Hitmontop or something? Like, why do we want to save the cool new coat of paint for the end of the game? Why don't you want to show the new cool coat of paint in the beginning of the game, like Whitney does?
Piloswine and Kingdra are all the aces of their gyms. In addition to them, Will's Xatu, Koga's Crobat, and Karen's Houndoom are all their respective aces.
Yeah.
Over half of the game's major fights use Gen 2 Pokemon as their aces, and that's pretty cool.
I agree. That is
But is
pretty
that
cool.
normal? Excluding Gen 1, where every Pokemon was original,
Sure.
let's take a look at another generation. In this case, Ruby and Sapphire. Of the 13
Yeah, the
Gen,
GOAT.
Elite Four, and Champion fights, 12 use Generation 3 Pokemon as their aces.
Yeah. That's the only one who
And a
doesn't.
whoopering 80% of the total Pokemon
Yeah.
in those fights are Gen 3.
Yeah.
Watson, what happened, my guy?
Don't.
What are you doing?
Why does everyone hate Watson?
Anyways, after Gen 2, it became standard practice to make ace Pokemon native to the new generation.
Yeah.
But the phrase after Gen 2 is important. Like with Red and Blue, there was very little standardized in Generation 2.
Sure.
In 1999, it was more standardized for a Pokemon game to include a condensed version of a previous region than to make aces out of the new Pokemon species. The true terror, the abomination of this video so far is that I haven't played a single frame of Pokemon Gold and Silver since I was 11. September 8th, 2008 was when I first started playing Pokemon Silver, and once my save file vanished with the sweet, sweet lithium anode that powered its day-night cycle sometime around Mount Silver, before I had a chance at challenging Red, I put the game away, only taking it out to see if, one day, in vain, the little dead battery inside had just a little bit more to give. One final push to see the cartridge it's called home for a quarter century completed so that it can finally be laid to rest. Sadly, there's still nothing there.
That's unfortunate.
Maybe someday he will return to us.
That sucks.
For now,
That's so
we
rough.
must turn our eyes elsewhere, to the Nintendo Switch Online, to the Nintendo PC, so I can return my feet to the warm sands of New Barktown. All the numbers we crunched, the BSTs, the spawn rates, the catching order, it was based on Pokemon Silver, that game I played so long ago. So, in the spirit of throwing away all the work we put in, let's play the very different, very similar, very different Pokemon Crystal.
What are we done? Wait, what are we doing now?
I pick up a Chikorita. I've never used a Chikorita before. Not when I played Silver as a kid, and not when I played Soul Silver as a slightly older kid, and not when I played Coliseum as an unemployed adult.
So
Many
true,
people say
bestie.
that Chikorita sucks. Something about poor type matchups against the Johto gym leaders. Is that true? Let's find out. But first things first. Let's catch a Bellsprout. You can find one very quickly. And while I don't see the use Many people in stream chat were saying it goes hard, and I should catch it. So I caught it. And where are we going? What's going on here? Someone help, I don't know what's happening. Where's this Bellsprout taking me? We're 10 minutes into the game, and how are we back here already? Right from the beginning, the game gives you many options, including the 1% Dunsparce. But the one that feels the most right is to trade a Bellsprout for an Onix in Violet City. Because, you know, I talked a lot of shit about Onix in the past. I used the poor guy as clickbait. Let's see him redeem himself.
He will not redeem himself.
In Major League Baseball, there's a stat called wins above replacement, or WAR for short. The basic idea is that this number consolidates all the positive and negative contributions of a player into a single number to roughly represent how many more wins that player contributed than a hypothetical AAA replacement player that would have played in his place. Imagining such a stat for Pokemon is tantalizing. But WAR has been developed for years and will continue to develop further, and Pokemon, unlike professional baseball, is easy. But still, let's try a very unscientific method. I reached the Elite Four with a party of C-Money the Meganium, Can Opener the Heracross, Rocky the Steelix, at Speedy Hawk the Suicune, Victor the Crobat, and Fish the Lantern.
Fish.
During the Vicious Gauntlet of Gen 2
Fish.
Victory Road, I swapped out Rocky for an egg gifted by the daycare couple.
Okay.
This second egg tutorial and first breeding tutorial has some variants. Unlike the first egg that always hatches into a Metronome Togepi, this egg is a goodie bag of shitty Pokemon. You can get any of the non-Togepi babies from it, and I wanted to know what baby I was going to add to my Pokedex, and I walked straight into the Elite Four with the egg, forgetting to get Rocky back out, and so now we get to the answer of the question we have all been waiting for. Does Onix contribute more in the Elite Four of Pokemon Gold and Silver and Crystal than an egg? I don't want to belabor the point or make an entire narrative out of the answer, because you all know the answer. The answer is of course fucking not. I beat the Elite Four, an Elite Four that I've not seen since I was 11, with an egg in the party and no Onix. This could be said of any Pokemon in the game. I beat the Elite Four with no Tyranitar, or Typhlosion, or Mewtwo, but with an egg. What stands out in this example, though, is that not only did I not have one of my mainstay party members from the entire game benched in Bill's PC, but I didn't even miss him. Is this mean? Yeah, but keep in mind that ground-type attacks are really good in Pokemon. They destroy poison types, electric types, fire types, rock types, and the new steel type. Some of these, like steel and rock, are nice because they're generally bulky Pokemon.
What's the point here?
Poison type is nice because it's the secondary typing of many Pokemon, including some tough mother like Gengar. Onix gets stab ground, so he's dealing 1 damage times 1.5 damage times 2 damage if it's super effective, and 4 times damage if it's super effective. That's like 6 times base damage when he's up against something really strong, like a Magnemite. But going into the Elite Four, Onix evolved into a Steelix, somehow only knew Mud Slap as his ground move, and that move had to be taught by TM.
Really bad.
You could say, oh, well, why not give Steelix Dig or Earthquake? Both can be taught via TM.
Yeah,
and
why didn't you do
all I
that?
can say to that is, what if I need them later?
You're at
Who might need these moves later?
You're at the E4. Just teach it before the. Oh, I guess he forgot.
Why Steelix, of course. Consider this as we finally give Onix his day in the now super effective sun.
Yeah,
Sabrina is the second gym leader I fought in Kanto. Watch with wonder as he digs to avoid future sight damage, and then also watch and wonder as a poisoned Mr. Mime survives long enough for the typeless future sight of a deceased Alakazam to kill Steelix on a turn that Sandstorm would have killed Mr. Mime. It's not that bad all the time for Onix. What's fun about getting a trade Pokemon before the first gym in the game is that you get the opportunity to work around one of Pokemon's oldest balancing tricks, traded Pokemon disobeying the player. With only 1 badge, Rocky will only obey the trainer if it's level 10 or below. Above that, it's anyone's guess. Who cares? We ball and all that. The second gym leader, Bugsy, is notoriously easy because bug types in general are easy to destroy early in games.
Yeah, they're weak.
But since I had a Meganium and no flyer and normal moves are boring, I took Onix, buffed by his elevated experience gain, who would not obey me until I received the badge from Bugsy, and used him to beat Bugsy. Onyx doesn't respect losers. I agree. And like a loser, I went with the tried and true strategy of using Bind,
Yeah.
hoping Onyx obeyed long enough to land one, and waiting out the Bind damage. People say Bind is a bad move, but really, I think they aren't trying hard enough to unbalance one of Pokemon's oldest balancing tricks. And for someone with my
Sure.
mediocre planning skills, tricks and nonsense is all that I have. At some point, rotting around the routes of Olivine City, I experienced the sublime joys of being bad at Pokemon. My team consisted of Bayleaf, Chinchou, Onix, Golbat, and Heracross. There's a big old water route where the most common Pokemon is Tentacool, so Bayleaf couldn't Razor Leaf everything.
I feel like this is off topic. I agree. I don't know what the point of this part is. What is the point? What are we talking about?
Chinchou,
right
an
now?
electric type, was still 4 levels away from learning Spark. The fighting type gym, led by Chuck, would be great for Golbat, but he doesn't learn Wing Attack
This is just a him playing the game.
until level 30. And Jasmine, the Steel Gym leader of Olivine, is out of level range, and my best counter, Onyx, is Onyx. Every option for progress would require some teeth gnashing, and this little stretch of video game revealed the great strength of Gen 2's overall map design. Around the time the player gets to Ecruteak
Map design. The greatness of the map design. Oh my! Is this all to talk about the map?
City, the game has been a mostly linear jog along this circle that starts Johto. Once the player is good and juiced up, beats Morty, and can surf outside of battle, 3 different Pokemon gyms open up to the player, all fairly equal in raw difficulty that can be tackled in any order. Based on the player's team composition, the fights will have variable actual difficulty, and while that means the fights the player does last will be easier, that's kind of the point. Instead of putting a series of brick walls in front of the player, the most brickly of the brick walls can be softened up by the player addressing the challenges in a sequence that works for them, rather than having to grind out each individual section. This design choice is
Sure.
expanded on in Kanto, where the 8 gyms can be fought in pretty much any order, with the order the player goes in reflecting need as much as convenience. For example, one of the final badges I got was Sabrina's because my party in Crystal wasn't well equipped to deal with psychic types, so I saved it. No Beedrill sweep to be found here. To give Steelix his flowers, his Mudslaps destroyed those Magnemites and that bum Steelix in Jasmine's gym because, like all Pokemon, he can work. All
Yeah.
Pokemon can work except Porygon 2, because let's be honest, you're not putting in the work to get Porygon 2. No one would do that. No one. There's no way. I'm not
Wow, how do you get Porygon
doing it,
2?
am I? No, not doing it. Because Porygon is purchasable from the Celadon Game Corner after beating Team Rocket and the Elite Four and all of Johto, and after you get the amulet coin and stick it on the can opener and grind out hardcore cash, you can blow it all on gambling tokens before reaching across the Chuck E. Cheese prize counter
Okay.
and snatching the program Pokemon Porygon and subjecting this poor
Okay.
artificial animal to a fate of getting double
Okay.
kicked by Nidokings. Or,
That's not how you pronounce that Pokemon.
you know, grab the upgrade disc from the guard
Okay.
at Silco, evolve the guy into Porygon 2, give him the
Okay.
Physic TM from Mr. Physics House, level him up,
Okay.
walk into Janine's Poison-type gym, use Agility twice, use Conversion to turn him into a Psychic type for
Okay.
Stab Psychic,
Sure.
and sweep the former 6th, present 14th gym.
I didn't realize that Porygon 2 was that difficult to get. And also, that is one of the generation lines we are counting in that 42% or 52% of Pokemon.
Design-wise, Porygon is one of my favorite Pokemon.
Sure.
Giving him 2 exotic
cool.
evolutions locked behind trades and his mythologized anime appearance is cool, and using Porygon 2
Oh,
in the
yeah.
post-game gave me a newfound appreciation for the digital duck. Many people in
The
the comments
digital
of the Gen
duck.
1 video noted that Porygon has a small competitive niche in Gen 1 where it serves as a strong counter against Snorlax.
Oh, that's
I didn't
cute.
look too much into competitive because I'm not a competitive player and frankly
That
don't
makes
know
sense.
enough to offer any meaningful insight. However, such knowledge did inspire me to explore Porygon more. And what I love about his single-player utility is that it's so pliable.
Okay,
Porygon can fill any hole in any team.
that makes sense.
I made mine a functional psychic type, but its ability to learn many powerful moves allows it to both cover gaps in your team and take advantage of powerful TMs that are likely rotting away in the player's backpack. Sadly for Porygon 2, also known as Stuart, the gap between its power and Red
Stuart.
gave it limited opportunities to shine. maybe one or two iconic battles. It's nothing Porygon 2 should feel bad about. I used Meganium for this playthrough. There's a long-standing tradition that Meganium sucks, which isn't true. The game can easily be beaten with Meganium, but saying Meganium can beat the game is like calling a Bic lighter a central heating unit. Yeah. Let's get...
That's rude. Why'd you burn his leg off? Also, have Porygon 2 having to being able to sweep 2 fights throughout the game is really good. At least from our like Nuzlocking perspective, being able to one-trick sweep something is pretty dope. And the fact that it can like be molded into like any type, and can be taught a whole bunch of TMs and stuff is really good. I didn't realize that Porygon 2 or Porygon and Porygon 2 were like that in depth.
Let's get crafty with it and make a
Okay.
defensive specialist grass type work.
Mm-hmm.
The whole game feels just so slightly stacked against Meganium. The bosses are mostly offensively or defensively strong against grass. The Rocket
Sure.
executives all use poison types.
Sure,
Tentacool is such a common wild Pokemon that you're better off using electricity when surfing.
makes
And
sense.
all the mandatory rock tunnels and mountain climbers can easily be dispatched by whatever water Pokemon is required to
Guys, what does Rhyhorn evolve into? I don't remember. Rhydon, why don't you go ahead and ride on these nuts?
Pokemon is required to use Surf and Waterfall. Using Meganium was easy. This is Gen 2 Pokemon, but it felt like forcing the issue. Throughout the game, Meganium and my whole party was constantly chasing an ever-moving goalpost. Just hit level 32 to evolve. Just hit level 41 to get Light Screen. Just hit level 61 to get Solar Beam. Just hit Bill's PC to positively contribute. I can be as facetious as I want about this, but it's a partial strength of Red and Blue, and one of the major strengths of Gold and Silver. From the moment Professor Elm donates the player attacks right off up until the final fight with Red at the far reaches of the postgame, there was always a Pokemon whose build was under construction. There was always something to work towards for most of the Pokemon I used. Early in the game, I needed Chinchou to hit level 25 to learn Spark, and then hit level
Sure.
27 to evolve into Lantern. And
Sure.
at the end of the game, I saved up $80,000 to learn Thunderbolt from the Goldenrod Game Corner Saturday Scammer. By the time the credits rolled, I had successfully completed builds of Pokemon like Steelix, Crobat, Lantern, and the Tyranitar Dirtbag, while some Pokemon like Porygon 2 and Heracross never hit their full peaks.
Gotcha.
For some players, this is heinous behavior on the game's part. The game locks cool Pokemon like Skarmory, Porygon, Tyranitar, and Houndoom to the late and or post-game.
Yeah,
Many
that's bad.
evolutions like stones and held items are locked to Kanto.
Yeah, that's bad.
Many powerful moves like Mega Horn and Flamethrower are locked behind astronomically high levels, and many of the game's
Yeah.
trainers, even into the final routes of Kanto, use Pokemon whose levels are in the 20s and 30s,
Yeah.
which results in deflated experience yield. This makes getting
It also just makes it easy.
to those high levels without grinding difficult, and for some Pokemon, unlikely. I understand why this is frustrating. The game has fun toys in it, and it's fun to use those toys, but the game restricts those toys. Your mileage may vary on this, but I'm a fan of building characters and Pokemon. I like the feeling of incompleteness. I like always having new goals and benchmarks that shift and move as the game goes on. If my team were fully complete by the Elite Four and doing little beyond that other than stat inflating, the Kanto portion of the game would be, frankly, boring.
I posit one additional thing. Why is Kanto in the game? I understand why Kanto is in the game, obviously. There's just so much inflation with like high levels for movesets, needing stones that are locked behind the first Elite Four, Pokemon on like one of like Pokemon in Victory Road being like level 30. It's weirdly inflated, and I like building Pokemon too. I like having a goal to go get something, like building Ludicolo for the Elite Four and the Emerald Hardcore Nuzlocke. That was fun. We found Ice Beam. We went to go get the grass or the Water Stone. Made sure we got all the vitamins. We built Ludicolo to be a bad tank, to be able to handle the Elite Four almost by himself. not to that extent, but that was the same with the rest of my Emerald Hardcore Nuzlocke team. It's like everybody had a niche, everybody had the TMs that they needed. We had to go find different items for them, and that was fun. But there was like an end goal to it. Gen 2 feels like there isn't ever an end goal because it has to balance itself around being 2 games. Gen 2 and then Kanto, and then going back to the Elite Four after Kanto. Bad movesets isn't new, yeah. I don't think movesets got fixed till like Gen 4 or Gen 5. But I don't know.
The game goes on.
Yeah.
If my team were fully complete by the Elite Four and doing little beyond that other than stat inflating, the Kanto
Then it would be good because then you would be at the Elite Four. And the Elite Four is the main challenge. The Elite Four is the penultimate situation, except for like the red fight afterwards. You are building these Pokemon for the Elite Four. The goal is the Elite Four. You should be done crafting the ultimate team so then you can take down the Elite Four and prove that you are the Pokemon master that you've become.
portion of the game would be, frankly, boring. I was, once upon a time, famous, as you can tell by my subscriber count, for making Fire Emblem videos and analysis, and an issue I've always had with that series is that the late games of many Fire Emblem games flatten out when characters finish their builds or when experience gain begins to slow down.
That's
The early
fair.
and mid games of that series are filled with micro objectives. Get this character to level 15, develop this support level, grind out this weapon rank, that liven up the macro objectives of completing levels and saving the world. So many of my runs of Fire Emblem games flamed out as these micro objectives, these short-term goalposts, dried up. Pokemon Gold and Silver avoids this by dispersing so many of the powerful moves and high-level evolutions and strong TMs across the entire game, constantly emphasizing growth over a finished product. This is fun, not just mechanically, but also as a vehicle to portray Pokemon's unchanging Everstone worldview. A major theme of the game, one that Silver, the game's Auburn rival, struggles with, is that Pokemon isn't about power, but growth. Being a mighty trainer is about growth. By the time he accepts this, in the hollows of Mount Silver, his party, seemingly complete, still has more to grow into. If the player fights Silver one final time at the Indigo Plateau, his Golbat, a Pokemon he has had going all the way back to Goldenrod City, has finally evolved into Crobat. Not only is this metaphorically significant because Crobat is a happiness evolution, it also shows that the journey to become stronger is more important than overwhelming everything that lies ahead of you. Thematically, it's resonant both with Silver and the player's own journey. In Pokemon Past and Present, flexibility is one of those minor skills that you don't really need to develop, but can help out a lot, especially for enjoying the games rather than being good at them. Some of the complaints about Gen 2, if addressed by Gold and Silver, wouldn't really improve the games. Rather, they would allow players to get more entrenched and stuck in their ways. All Pokemon would have good availability, all Pokemon would have a signature stab move that's available early in their lives, and everything would be varying shades of the same. Many players want their 6-party Pokemon to be obtainable relatively quickly, and to be built relatively quickly. It's fun to have that fully operational battle station as long as possible, but if the player is willing to mix and match, is willing to let some Pokemon go, and is willing to build their pocket monsters over time, the game's design emerges as a contributor
that's fun. That's cool.
rather than an impediment to enjoyment. I beat the Elite Four with a party of Meganium, Heracross, Crobat, Lantern, Suicune, and Egg, and beat Red with a party of Steelix, Heracross, Crobat, Tyranitar, Porygon 2, and Lantern. Across Kanto, I turned over half of my party, and only had to stop and grind exactly one level in my entire playthrough to get Pupitar to level 52 to eat 3 rare candies before Red. If you take the game as a whole, those post-game Pokemon, your Porygons and Larvitars and Houndours and
Slugma
go from artificially restricted to Pokemon that get substantial opportunity to shine. Porygon 2 and Tyranitar, 2 of my Gen 2 favorites, had ample opportunity to be great. Yeah, it sucks on some level that Tyranitar only gets one story fight to shine, but it also preserves its mythical status as rare and powerful. Really, the only Gen 2 Pokemon that I feel were done excessively dirty were Mischievous and Murkrow, because neither has the raw power of Tyranitar or Houndoom, or the incredible flexibility of Porygon 2 to justify them being unusable for so much of the game.
That's super true.
It just feels a little sad. I'm sure, though, that we will have plenty of time to talk about this later, because this video will never end. But why talk about later when there's time now? I said Mischievous got done dirty, but while Nin, the editor of this video, was goofing around in Crystal, he used a Mischievous at base level to knock out Red Snorlax. Hey look, that's Tyranitar's utility without having to put any work in at all.
Whoa!
Yeah! Red himself, whether you call him the true final boss or a secret super boss or whatever you want to say, marks the end of the journey in Gen 2,
Yeah.
and there's an infamy with Red because of the heinous levels that his Pokemon have. What makes him so intimidating is this combination of high levels that are, for the most part, only for show. I, a genuinely mediocre Pokemon player, beat him with exactly one level of grinding to get the game corner Larvitar into a Tyranitar. And his mixed team. Generally, in Pokemon, you have two types of boss fights: typed teams and mixed teams.
Sure.
Gym leaders and Elite Four members are usually typed, while rivals and champions are usually mixed.
Yeah.
Typed teams usually ask players to have prepared counters to a specific problem. Chuck, for example, has two high-level fighting-type Pokemon, so the game is seeing if you have a strong counter to those Pokemon. For young players, that usually comes down to super effective options. Do you have a strong flying type or psychic type?
Yeah, most
It's
of
never
the time.
really that restrictive, and there are almost as many answers as there are Pokemon in the game. But in general, the challenge of a gym leader is having the one or two offensive and defensive counters to the gym. For mixed-type battles, the challenge is about flexibility, and having a holistic approach where each Pokemon can handle different problems, but need each other for victory.
Yes,
Mixed
that
fights are
makes
often
sense.
more difficult fights because it's harder to sweep through an entire team with one or two Pokemon. Bruno, for example, has a Hitmontop, Hitmonchan, Hitmonlee, and Machamp as 4 out of his 5 Pokemon, which means a Crobat can barrel over his whole crew basically uninterrupted. Well, what about his Onix, you might say? And Bite is now Dark-type, I say, but I didn't test it because that would be stupid when I have 2 Surf users. Is it bad design to have most fights in the game weak to one type? Yes, no, maybe so. Consider that a pin
It's
question
a child's game.
for another video. But
Yeah,
with monotype
we'll talk about
teams,
that
we see
later.
a couple interesting designs begin to emerge in Gold and Silver that will be built upon later in the series. There are, as of now, 171 different Pokemon type combinations that can exist. And hey, look at that!
Holy.
I learned what mathematical combinations are between the Gen 1 video and this one. Only
Congrats.
9 combinations: normal rock, normal bug, normal steel, poison ice, ground fairy, rock ghost, bug dragon, and fire fairy remain unused. Which is a shame because a poison ice muck variant sounds tight as hell, but
That does
what's
sound
notable
cool.
about all these different typings is that the monotype structure can become more dynamic as the series progresses. One of my favorite tricks that some gym leaders pull is having a Pokemon whose typing cancels out a common weakness for the gym.
Yeah, Wish Cash.
For example, Winona, the flying gym leader of
Yeah.
Pokemon Emerald, uses an Altaria whose dragon typing cancels out its weakness to electricity,
Yeah.
and a Skarmory whose steel typing cancels out its rock weakness.
Yeah.
The introduction of abilities from Gen 3 onwards makes these types of challenges even more common, but that's a discussion for Gen 3. Early on in the series, these subversions weren't as easy to do because the pool of available Pokemon was much more limited.
That makes
In
sense.
Gen 1, the only gym leader Pokemon that counters the gym's type weakness is Sabrina's Venomoth. Gen 2 likewise only has one gym leader that resists a type's weakness, in this case Claire's Kingdra against Ice. While the
Yeah,
number
yeah,
itself
yeah.
is the same, what
That
makes
makes
Kingdra
sense.
more exciting than Venomoth is that Kingdra is a dragon type. Unlike Venomoth or Bruno's Onix in the Elite Four, Kingdra maintains the kayfabe of the gym's type. This is a weird thing to care about because it doesn't really matter. All that matters is that a fight's fun.
Yeah, what's
In
the
my
point
playthrough
here?
of Crystal, the fight against Karen, the Dark type Elite Four member, was much more fun than Chuck, the fighting gym leader. Even though Karen breaks her Dark type with Vileplume and Gengar, her fight is both long enough and varied enough to be a fun fight. The
I agree.
monotype structure for gyms is a gimmick that's mostly fun for its own sake. There's nothing sacred about it, nor is there some secret genius to it. Yet, I love it. Like wrestlers, the gimmicks of these leaders have greater aesthetic importance than whatever gameplay ramifications they have. Look at the way the designs of Faulkner, Bugsy, Claire, and Lance reflect their chosen types. Sometimes it's pretty basic, like yeah, Faulkner's just some dude that walks around with a bird cage. Other times it can
Let's
be a
go, Kramer Ant matching.
little more subtle, like how Claire's design reflects her dragons of the sea, while Lance's reflects his dragons of the sky. In these
Yeah.
design choices,
These
big
are really
and
cool.
small,
I agree.
we see the limits of perfect optimized design. Theoretically, Pokemon would be a better designed series if its gym leaders and major bosses followed a gentle ramp-up of difficulty and complexity, taking advantage of varied teams of diverse Pokemon and typings, and slowly escalated the pressure on players to understand the nuance of utility moves, weather, stage traps,
Yeah.
novel dual types, physical
Yeah.
special typings, the split between defense and special defense, and on down the list of gently explained, rarely meaningful mechanics that underscore the super effective tapping that defines most of Pokemon's combat.
It would be cool. It would be really cool if they did that. And it's like a lot of ROM hacks do that. And they still keep the monotype
Getting good at Pokemon,
thing.
being able to take advantage of all these small features of the systems
Yeah.
and the moves and the individual Pokemon is deeply satisfying.
Yes, it is.
But this is a small part of the games. And limits are
why is it? I think you're I guess I would just have a different perspective. I don't feel like that's a small part of the game. That's a big part of the game for us trying to do challenge runs, is understanding and mastering all of the little stuff and finding new and different ways to not just click the super effective button, because sometimes the super effective button doesn't work all the way.
But this is a small part of the games.
It's not,
and limits
though.
our ability to
I
appreciate
guess.
what the Pokemon games do. If the procession of gyms in Gold and Silver were on a gentle upward curve of complexity, abandoning the monotype structure for diverse teams, the game would be strategically superior, activating more neurons in the brain of devilish gamers,
Yeah.
but it would lose some of the character that defines Pokemon.
Yeah, I don't think it needs
Would
to do that.
Gold and Silver be better if the themed fights of Lance and Jasmine were replaced by strategically more demanding, aesthetically less distinct fights?
I don't think so.
High-intensity Pokemon challenges do have a place, but oftentimes the main story with its adventuring and evildoers and rags-to-riches childhood dreams is the wrong place for it.
What?
When I'm playing through the story of a Pokemon game, give
Yeah.
me the simple aesthetic pleasure of throwing boulders around Chuck's gym and blasting electrodes in the radio tower.
Yeah, sure.
For more
sure,
advanced
sure.
players and players that really want to sink their teeth into the depth of Pokemon's battle system and team building, there is competitive, a completely unlimited resource. And in the single player, there is post-game. Some of the most popular features in Pokemon are the Battle Frontier in Pokemon Emerald, and the Pokemon Tower, which has appeared in many games. It originates here in Pokemon Crystal. What makes the Battle Tower and similar high-level challenges important is that they let the Pokemon games have it both ways. They get the easy, light, fun, colorful adventure of the main game while also satisfying the ravenous thirst to master the back and forth of Pokemon's combat. The circle of players that loves Pokemon battles is not quite as big as the circle of players that love Pokemon, but it's still a big circle, and one that was identified quickly. There is not a lot of mechanical satisfaction to be found in Gold and Silver's postgame. After defeating the Elite Four, the player is allowed to explore Kanto, the old stomping grounds of Red and Blue. Kanto is both truncated and corrupted by the deforestation of Viridian Forest and the metamorphosis of the Pokemon Tower from a sacred burial ground to a radio tower, a foul monument to the commodification of all land and tradition by capitalist orthodoxy.
Didn't realize we were gonna get that mic drop now. Okay.
Mechanically, it's less a sandbox and more a slaughterhouse. The player, fresh off dominating the Elite Four, is allowed to exterminate the 8 Kanto gyms that once stood mighty over Pokemon Red and Blue. Kanto tops off the story, provides fan service, lets the player fill out the Pokedex, and is generally great. It even gives you the best item in the Pokemon series, the Berserk Gene. On one hand, the low difficulty means that using some of the Kanto Pokemon, like Porygon and Slugma, is possible. But on the other hand, it established a white whale for Pokemon fans that still remains uncaptured 25 years later. A game that takes players through multiple regions, but outside of Red, the contemplative and quiet Pokemon master that meditates atop Mount Silver, there is nothing that takes the challenge beyond Lance. Nothing that demands more of the player's battle mastery than the main game.
Sure.
That circle of hardcore players would be fed by Crystal's Battle Tower, and while an intense, exclusively battle-focused game wouldn't work for a mainline Pokemon game, it doesn't mean it couldn't work in general. I wonder if there's a game like that. Pokemon Stadium 2 is the sequel to Pokemon Stadium, which is a sequel to Pocket
What are we talking about? Wait, where are we going with this?
Monster Stadium, and therefore cannot be given credit for creating a battle-focused, hardcore gamers-only Pokemon experience. But this is a video about Generation 2, and Pokemon Stadium 2 is a second-generation Pokemon game.
Okay.
Some people in the comments of the Gen 1 video requested that I make a video on Stadium.
I have Pokemon Coliseum right here. It just came in the mail today. But I haven't played Pokemon Stadium.
I've never played it, and when the hell else am I going to get the opportunity to talk about it?
I don't know, make a video about it.
Going back to Gen 2 has been an enlightening experience. I have, on record, on video, somewhere on some stream or video or another, called Gen 2 one of the worst Pokemon generations. This was partially groupthink. I had taken all the low-level trainers and all the Kanto-locked Pokemon as an indication that the game was bad. Same as many others. The way people always spoke of Gen 2 as if they were games ashamed of themselves, ashamed of the Pokemon, and ashamed of Kanto, and as rush jobs, was a discourse gospel that enveloped these games. Replaying them, and beating them properly for the first time, I found two personal truths. The first is that the difference between most Pokemon generations is on a razor's edge. Sorry to the old heads and sorry to the newbies, but the gaps in quality between Gens 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 are much more thin than some fans acknowledge. The only real wrinkle to that is Gens 8 and 9, whose technical issues, particularly Gen 9, are so profound that they are pulled below the waves of their addictingly good Pokemon loop. The second thing I learned is that all the jank and the stupid and the shame that Gen 2 is accused of is actually stuff that I love. Hiding away Pokemon late into the game and evolutions behind hard-to-get stones and day-dependent activities is the type of textbook foolishness that I adore. Longtime viewers will know that Demon Souls is my favorite From Software game, and I love Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, and Super Mario Bros. 2 is my favorite NES Mario game, so my love
I don't think... Wait, was that Super Mario Bros. 2?
Quest and Super Mario...
That doesn't look like Super Mario Bros. 2.
Mario Bros. 2 is my favorite NES Mario game, so my love for every seemingly dumb thing that Gen 2 does to conceal itself checks out completely. Gen 2 may hate itself, or so it is said, but I love it. Frequently, the nostalgia that resonates the loudest is the stuff that was just there when we were born. Red and Blue were just there. Gold and Silver were not. There was no prehistory of my life that Gold and Silver were a part of, because by the time I was in Little League and wanted to play these games, I was old enough to consciously seek them out. For the next games in the series, Ruby and Sapphire, that wasn't the case. These were games that were always there, which, I suppose, means I'm sequel baiting, and I'm sorry, but also, I can't help myself. I'll see you soon in the water parks of Hoenn. And if I'm gonna sequel bait, consider subscribing.
The thesis here is that they're actually really not that bad because of the points he talked about. And the points he talked about were the supposed lack of Gen 2 Pokemon, which I feel like he explained thoroughly, that actually there is a lot of Gen 2 Pokemon available. And also the fact that the Gen 2 Pokemon that are available are difficult to obtain, and he enjoys the thrill and the drive to go catch those Pokemon and to go get those stones. And then he talked about Pokemon Stadium for like 20 minutes. And I don't really know why. But we learned that we should play Pokemon Stadium 2. Because that looked fun as shit. I am convinced, personally, that the availability of Pokemon from Gen 2 was not as bad as people remember. And that's fair. I do think it is an atrocity the fact that the first bunch of trainers and gym leaders only use Gen 1 Pokemon for some reason, which is a little dumb. You want to put your best foot forward. You want to put the cool new stuff in the beginning. So the first 2 gyms not having any new Pokemon is weird, and I think that's bad. He did not talk about the split path problem. You can start by either going east of Ecruteak or going west of Ecruteak because you have Surf. The problem with that is that the game does not dynamically adjust to the levels that you are at. If you do one half of the Ecruteak split and then go back and do the other half of the Ecruteak split, which you have to do, one of those halves is going to be unbelievably easy and unbelievably boring because you have a huge amount of experience and level ups from doing the other half. That is the problem, in my opinion. The split paths is interesting, but the fact that they didn't have the capabilities to do like the dynamic leveling is unfortunate. But I do think he made a lot of good points around the availability of Pokemon and stuff. So there was that at least. All in all, good video. The editing was amazing. Kudos to the editor. I think the script that guy wrote was pretty good. Way better than scripts that I've written for stuff. I just don't think he hit the points that I would have hit and the reasons why I don't like Gen 2. But he did convince me to play Stadium 2, or Pokemon Stadium 2, and he did convince me that there is more Gen 2 Pokemon available in the Gen 2 games than we remember. I think it's important for people to realize that when these games came out, nobody saw them as Gen 2. These were seen as Pokemon, but better. These were the sequels to RBY, and they had only come out a few years later. No one was sick of Gen 1 yet, and nobody was sick of Kanto yet. They were just happy to have more Pokemon games. There wasn't this huge distinction between 1 and Gen 2. This, I think, is something interesting and good to bring up as well. I think that a lot of people lose sight of the timing of it all. So I think this is actually like relevant. Go subscribe to Professor Bopper or Bopper. I'll leave a like. I like this video. Good suggestion by Fred.